happy to have more chances to meet or discuss things. And I will also explain very briefly the type of research that I do. Then we move into the core theme of this session today, trying to understand specifically or mostly from the management view, but what do we mean and how do we do theoretical contributions. So just to give you a broader picture, hopefully, of what is so the reason why we spell it SDU is because in Danish we say Syddansk Universitet. It's not University of Southern Denmark, but it's Syddansk Universitet. We have very nice buildings, and that's one of the things that helps us to attract a lot of students. We basically, as you can imagine, we have the same challenges as the Lorraine University has. So we want to be very good in education, research, internationalization, but also in civic engagement in our society, in our context. Just to give you some quick numbers, and I think they are updated on 2018, that you can also see that the size is quite similar. We are not the largest university in Denmark. We are a small university or medium university, and we are also quite a young university. It's compared to University of Copenhagen or other universities that come from long time, we are a bit smaller. You might be already surprised. I don't know if there is a number that is surprising. The session, you can stop me any moment. So if there is any question or any during now or afterwards, please stop me and ask. So yeah, just to also give you an idea, we cover in the university almost all the fields. So we are a quite diverse university: social sciences, humanity, natural sciences, and also engineering, as you will see. But the university in our case is the result of the merger of many smaller universities. And that's also a concentration process that has happened also in Norway, in Denmark. And what you can see is, for example, that the Faculty of Engineering started in 2006. Our campus, Sonneborg, was a small college, an engineering college that then became part of SDU. As you can imagine, it's always a challenge to manage universities that have many different histories and paths. But that's a problem that the management has. I'm not yet having this problem. What is interesting about what is going on in the university, there are a couple of new initiatives that have, let's say that they are flagship initiatives inside the university. An interesting thing is that we created the Danish Institute for Advanced Study. This means that we are trying to get our best people, but also people from outside, to push the like the frontiers in specific research fields that we believe we can be unique or we can be special. One of our professors that is affiliated in our campus is, for example, what we call the Master of Light. He does all this work on plasmonics and all those things that I hardly understand, but it's super interesting, no? As I was saying, we like buildings, and it seems a lot of our money goes into very nice buildings. This is part of the building in Kolding that has architecture prizes. This is also a more recent building. This is the Cortex Lab. It's like the innovation park that we have in Odense. We have a smaller one in Sonneborg. And then we have I think it's for me, it sounds like a crazy project, but we are building the whole new hospital of Odense next to the university, because we have a very strong focus on medical sciences. And now one of the, for me again, coming from Spain, it looks like a crazy project because we are rebuilding the whole, is one of the best hospitals, university hospital in Denmark. Now it's being built or rebuilt next to the university to increase this collaboration spaces. We have other interesting things, but that's just to give you an idea of other things with drones and other elements. Last thing about the whole university is that, as I was mentioning, this is a multi-campus university. So it means challenges for coordination, organization, management. It also means that ideally the campuses, except Odense, have a little bit of focus, thematic focus. Our campus has the focus on engineering mostly. We have also a bit of social sciences, but in Sonneborg we are the ones that are closer to Germany, the ones in brown here. We have a bit more focus on engineering. To also briefly explain you the section that I belong, so inside this campus in Sonneborg, I am part of a specific section. That section is called Technology, Entrepreneurship and Innovation. What we do basically is that we follow the whole innovation process, from creativity, brainstorming, bringing those things to a reality, prototyping, then trying to see, okay, if you want to do that product, we are thinking about engineering, so a lot of physical products, not that much yet services. So how would you produce it? And then finally, if you have to sell it, how would you commercialize it? As you can imagine, this is not a sequential process, but it is a process that has a lot of back and forth, and we draw it like as a perfect process, but usually it doesn't go this way. And one of the nice things we have, and Mauricio and Alexandra could see it, is this innovation lab that is constantly changing. Now it's becoming maybe also a smart factory lab, other things. Just to present also the rest of the team that we have kind of inside our section, we have two smaller teams, thematic teams. So I have quite a few colleagues that focus on the whole story around the smart factories. They use digitalization, digital twins, how IoT would be working, simulation, I'm thinking about a lot of also all the ideas about lean automatization, all those elements. And we work a lot with some of the companies nearby, like Linac, Lego, Danfoss, and now we are trying to also get a few more in this area. And then we have, again, this is kind of creating an artificial separation, but we have a smaller team also that is mostly focused on technology entrepreneurship and innovation in this area as a research area, not only as a, and that's where I'm together with Silke that works on more on entrepreneurship in general, team that works in technology innovation and user innovation, and then also with Kari that is a PhD student, hopefully finishing soon, that works more on the education angle. The idea is that we combine like our strengths, and at the end we have something that looks like a multidisciplinary and also complex section. Only 3 slides about my research area. Also, this is kind of a promotion so that in this way you remember me and then you know what I'm working on after the presentation today. So my key focus is on technology entrepreneurship. That's what I originally was working more and what I like a lot. So the whole story that we usually tell is that in technology entrepreneurship, as it happens in many situations, you should not only look at the surface, because there is a lot of things happening below the surface. And the ones that are now on top, so if you think about Facebooks and Twitters and other like Airbnb, all those companies are not the ones that will be alive in a few years. So we need to see this as a process, as a dynamic element. That means that we do, in this case, a lot of the research that I do is, for example, trying to understand what is actually going on. Is all types of technology entrepreneurship the same? No, yes, there are different phenomena. And then we try to explain this type of different dynamics that are going on. Another area that I particularly like is all the decision-making aspects. I'm not that good in multi-decision, for example, or MCDA, all those methods, but from the management side, sometimes we look more about what affects the person and the process of thinking about something. And then we do some work on, in this case, was more with CEOs, but also with entrepreneurs, on how they make decisions in complex situations or in certain situations. Another thing that we are also working, because we have a bit of pressure also to understand from our industrial players of what is the future, or what will be the future, is trying to understand how new technologies change industries and how entrepreneurs and established companies can work together to generate new stuff. And then that's what we did with drones research, and hopefully we have something, a couple of more things coming out on this area. Another aspect, and that's what links to what I was mentioning before with my colleague Kari, we work on the whole idea about how scientists and entrepreneurs and students can work together to do this commercialization challenge, this valley of death. Also again, promotion here, we just had a paper that got accepted and we are very happy because it's the first step towards trying to explain this education process. And last thing that we also work is sometimes we have to work in industries that maybe we didn't know that much and we still are trying to learn more. For example, we were working on clean tech or green entrepreneurship. And for us it was very interesting to see that they follow different strategies when they want to convince people to invest in them, come in as part of the board or get involved than other types of entrepreneurs. And because this is a very long maturation process, very challenging, capital intensive, and other stories. And something that we are also trying to be more explicit and get better is how much can we do diffusion and things that matter to our innovation partners or support. So how can we explain, or how can we explain what is going on, for example, in the wind industry that for Denmark is super important. They are worried about the companies like Vestas or Siemens Gamesa in the future will not produce in Denmark because the markets are moving to India or other places. So what should we do? What can we do to understand how to keep the value-added activities in Denmark? Can we do anything? Should we open up the turbines and just make it an open patent and then try to move to other services or stuff like this? So the reason why I assume that you came here was to try to see a bit more what do we know about theoretical contributions and how to build them. Before I go into the topic, I have to explain you also why I was interested in this area, and maybe that's also something that we share or that you see it differently. For me, I was always very frustrated when I would discuss things even with my supervisor, with colleagues, or even when you send to a journal, and then somebody would reply to you saying, oh, there is no clear theoretical contribution in the paper. So you need to reassess what you're doing, what is going to be your theoretical contribution. And for me, this was kind of a black box. I said, okay, I don't understand what it means. I'm using theory. So why do you challenge me saying that I don't have a theoretical contribution? So this was the starting point. And then what you will see in the session, and again, you're free to stop me, discuss. What you will see is that I've been trying to collect material from different people. So most of the things, I think almost anything comes from my own experience or problems I had with papers. So it comes from people that also had similar interest and wrote about this. And it's an attempt to summarize those things. As an attempt to summarize, it's a bit long. So we will need to also decide at some point, says, okay, this, you see the reference, I can even share the paper if you want, or we can talk another moment. So if you're more interested in that or you want to get more details. I'll try to keep track of the time. I've structured the session in at least 3 main blocks. So first of all, we need a bit of a warm-up. So we need to agree on some things that I actually think it's very hard to agree on. What is a good paper? What is a good contribution? What makes it good? It will be difficult that we start agreeing. Let's see. And then we will focus on what do we know, what people have been working on about theoretical contributions. You will see most of the examples come from management research. And my opinion is that it's not so hard to translate this to many other fields, or at least I think it's possible. But if we need to clarify or discuss some points, I'm also happy. So if it's okay in engineering, maybe this is not always true, or there are some boundaries or some elements, we can talk about this. There is a lot of material, and I will also be stopping by on the idea of how we communicate those contributions. But for me, surprising also, and it also shows the differences between management and engineering, is that in engineering you would say, it's enough if I have done something that works better, that is better than what was before, this should be published. In management, they will say, yes, this should be published, but then you will need to put a lot of effort on how you communicate, how do you put that in context so that it gets published. So it becomes almost as important to do the good job than to show that you've done a good job. And that's again a hard point sometimes to convince people that why should I do that. I will finish with a very short example, and we can also discuss about this, of what you can do next week to get started. Maybe some of you already say, okay, I already do it this way, but that also comes from some papers that they suggest specific things. Oh, so that at least for 1 minute I will stop talking, because I need something from you. I need that you try to think or try to remember a paper that you've looked or read in the last, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, that you thought, wow, this is a good paper. Can we do that? I give you 1 minute or 30 seconds. I just need to have this in your head. So that was the question that also together with Gree we discussed, like, yeah, so what makes a good paper? No? And she said, I don't know. So she decided to ask people, and then she ran a workshop in her university in Boda. And then after quite a bit of discussion, she managed to create this framework. And I asked her, can I share it with people? And she said, yes, but she said, it's not a validated framework. I said, okay, well, we know this. And now we can discuss, okay, so at least for her on this moment, she said, it needs to be interesting. It needs to have novelty, it needs to have relevance. And then she was saying, oh, but some of the students also said that it needs to present something interesting. And the way it's presented, it also needs to be special. Because maybe there is a super nice idea or good idea, but then maybe that paper is super difficult to read, or super difficult, there are no, then he says, okay, even if it's novel or is super kind of breakthrough, radical new idea, it's not clear. And then the other aspect says, okay, on some papers, so let's say that this can be overlapping, and in here it's like kind of explained like that they don't overlap, but this could be overlapping. But it also could be that there is a very nice contribution or that also uses a very rigorous method. So for example, if the discussion about Mars, then the person is missing something like the temperature in Mars, or is missing the type of minerals that are there. You'll say, oh, come on, you have a very nice idea, but you are missing big things. No? You should have at least done some prior research. So that was what I like this as a kind of a non-academic discussion that she had. So what do people say, at least in management research? They say, oh, it needs to be different. So that's the first thing, the first thought. And also, here I'm kind of moving on the highlights. It needs to have also proposed something new. I don't know if you buy this idea that in that paper they were proposing something new thanks to their data and the connection. But it's interesting that they say, yeah, but there is something about the problem about this, how different a paper is. So maybe it's something related that we need to take into consideration that when we contribute, we need to acknowledge what has been done before. So sometimes you can go with a very radical new idea, but then you need to build upon what others have done. So not kind of being ignorant about that. And that's, at least for me, it's one of the challenging things. So it's okay, how can I connect what they call here this relational foundation? And we will see that this is very easy to talk about, but when it comes to the time of writing, it's very hard to know how to specifically do this. I like a kind of a more visual tools. So sometimes it's difficult to understand text, so I need visual clues. And that comes from, I think it was a presentation in Druid last year. And what I think they were discussing this whole idea of what makes it a good paper, and they were focusing a lot on the idea of impact. I think they looked, in this paper from UTSI, they looked at 16.7 million articles, and then they were trying to look at the number of citations. Don't ask me what source they were using to look at the citations. But what they found out is that the papers that were more successful were the papers following in the quadrant. I'll go back and forth, maybe. So in the green quadrant here. So they were papers that had quite a lot of novelty, like how will life be in Mars, or how should we think about sustainability in Mars. But then they also had what they called convention. So they were building on established methods, established measures, on established knowledge. They were not going for the, let's say, I don't know, the red area that is kind of a breakthrough paper that, for example, says, and I think the example from Newton is easier, says when Newton was presenting, don't ask me, I haven't read the paper, but his gravitational laws, he was using accepted geometry instead of using calculus. But he said, I have to use this approach so that people can understand the message. And then I'm presenting one novel idea at a time. And this, when you read it or when you hear it, says, oh, that's kind of logical, no? That we should mix convention and novelty. But it becomes quite difficult. So the objective at the end of the session is that we know something about how we phrase something related to novelty. So how do I explain that I have a novel thing going on here? And how at the same time I'm able to articulate my discourse, my communication, so that people are comfortable and follow me, because I'm still conventional enough to strike this balance. We need to take a step back. We need to go back to something that maybe it's boring for some of the audience. I hope it's not. I promise to go fast. But we need to go back to things like what is a theory and what is a theoretical contribution. You might not agree with what I present. If you don't, please raise the hand, because we could enrich this discussion. I'm using very much an area that is familiar to me. I hope it's also easy to transfer to other areas. I'm using entrepreneurship, our kind of concepts to explain what is a theory. So this comes from Jim Combs. So he says basically a theory is a set of assumptions and the causal logic that explains the relationship among constructs. Says not variables. The two kind of levels on this thing is that how do we operationalize constructs? We use variables. We use measures to do that. We have the example on this EO is entrepreneurial orientation, but we can think about innovation orientation or many other things that you are doing research on. And then we have a theory that when this is high, then we have also new venture growth. How do we measure that? Okay, I use a survey scale for the EO, and then I try to track the change in sales during a few years to see whether the venture is growing or not. So what is interesting is that then we can develop a whole theory. So we can connect the constructs, why it makes sense that when we have high entrepreneurial orientation, conceptually, we will see also more growth. But then we need to limit a space where this works. And that's where the whole trick for me starts. because what is nice is that then a theory has boundaries. That means that we can challenge those boundaries. And that's where we already start to have options to contribute and say things about that. It can be about the values, time, space, whether this applies to universities or it applies to rural communities in France, but not rural communities in India. It can be many of those things. And then there is the whole discussion that maybe you also get, or at least I hate when I get those comments from the reviewers, says I'm not so clear about how much your findings are generalizable. Can you share them or extend them to other situations? And you say, can you find another situation where this would apply? You say, oh, this is hard. But it's one of the challenges we usually have. My colleague Tim always tells me, yeah, but it's important to also remember what theory is not. He says, okay, what theory is not only just a collection of references, a lot of diagrams. I do diagrams always. He says, okay, this is not theory, so only. So you can develop explicit or make visible a theory with diagrams, but not just because you have diagrams, you will have a theory. Going into a specific example, and hopefully I convinced you now on the strategy that why is it challenging to get started with these theoretical contributions. This example comes from the work from Tim. So he was very interested in seeing how hierarchical distance, so between managers, the top boss, and employees in a company, would affect how they evaluate ideas. So he does a lot of work in these idea innovation competitions. So then he was trying to see, okay, one of the things I know is that people have biases and they are based, for example, that they prefer some people from their department or people from another department, and when they see an idea, they don't objectively or rationally evaluate that. There is sometimes an effect that, oh, I know Ferran, so I will try. I like his ideas in general, so I will give him a better evaluation. He could also find that there is the fact that you are similar, this idea of homophily, no? That if you are similar to the other person, you might also be more likely to evaluate their ideas positively. At least that was some prior research was saying. And then he found out, okay, that not much research has been exploring the idea that hierarchical similarity or difference could affect the idea evaluation. And then he said, oh, I have a research project. So then he was trying to find whether the hierarchical distance, the fact that you are an employee or just a person in the factory versus the one that is the executive or the innovation executive in the company, when they generate ideas, people would evaluate them differently, and they would be biased or not. So he had the ideas in, let's say, in paper, but then he had to do something. He had to put this in a way, and this is very explicit, that we can think about what does it mean, no? What it means that, so applying the lenses of homophily in this case, the fact that we are more similar will make us more likely to evaluate positively their ideas. This is shown in those graphs. I could be using the laser, but it's okay. So what you see in the, on the bottom, so in the X, let's say it's the D, the hierarchical distance that I have, how much far away, above or below I'm from that person. And what you see in the E is how I assess their ideas. So using this perspective, what we will see is that the closer I am, the better I would be evaluating those ideas. If we look at the expectation states and social status perspective, what we will say is that people that have high positions in the organization, I would be more likely to evaluate their ideas positively. So the more distance, especially upwards, I would be evaluating better. And then finally, the story that individuals that share a similar position, actually, it will go on the opposite way of homophily. So there is a contrary explanation to that. That they will say, no, actually it's more likely that when you see an idea that comes from a colleague in the same position in the organization, you want to evaluate it negatively, because if his idea gets funded and gets money, he's likely to promote.
Hakim is always like that.
Okay, then, but then you follow more this rivalry competition approach.
More than that, because I even get bad people will have over me.
Another option is that you send them a lot of papers to read. Then they stay busy, and then you can do the next research. That's also a good option. So then his research, the objective was to say, okay, he expected I will be able to contribute to theory because I would clarify in this situation how things actually happen. Which one of those dominates in this specific case? So this, at least the way I understand, this is a good example of, okay, how do I build, how do I get started into developing a theory? But again, for me, the question that we were also having is, okay, but will this be seen as a theoretical contribution? You never know. It depends on the reviewer. No, but we should not make it reviewer dependent. So what is then specifically a theoretical contribution? It says, okay, it should be a supported insight that challenges, extends a theory, assumptions, the causal logic, the direction, the link between constructs, or maybe it's a new or adapted theory to a new context. As you can see, it can be many things, and that's probably one of the problems we have, that it can be many things, and sometimes people have in their mind an expectation that it's not what we do in the paper. What I like from the work from Jim Combs when he was doing this presentation is that he was able to put a specific example. Says, okay, there is a lot of like work on entrepreneurial orientation and growth. But what if you find that there is a specific type of entrepreneurial orientation or innovation orientation driven by a specific type of antecedents that is the one driving growth. But when it's driven by other types of antecedents, you don't see growth. So you are clarifying that theory. Okay, then you would have a contribution. What happens if you find that in this case it will be a moderator, no? That this happens specifically or even more in this type of conditions. So SMEs that have had hired people, PhDs from university, are more likely to innovate than other ones. So okay, then you are generating also a theoretical contribution. Maybe the level of the theoretical contribution is not the same, but we should be able to claim that we have something here. Those are examples that he has. So sometimes in the discussions that we also engage, we say, okay, are we challenging the whats and the hows? Are we challenging the whys? Most of those cases we are doing something. Are we just modifying some of whens and wheres? And here I'm currently in a discussion with a couple of colleagues trying to put even in a quadrant. So things that can happen and things that are expected to happen. And we realize that actually the only way that we have to do a contribution is if we see something that is surprising, something that should work or should happen, but it's actually not happening. And then we have the possibility, maybe through a more qualitative approach, to have a contribution. But the reviewers told to us when we submitted the first version of the manuscript that this was not unexpected, that that's actually what they would be expecting. So unless we find a different angle, this is not so interesting. For us, it's super interesting, and we don't agree with them. But that's another story.
So you were refused?
Sorry?
You were refused?
Yeah, it was rejected.
Yeah.
Super nice reviews, super nice, very long, but
Very
rejected.
polite.
But rejected, yeah. I have, and here, this is more to show you that this is not kind of, just to show an evidence that different people use different words to talk about the same problem. For management people, AMR is the house of the theories. So it's where new theories appear or new things come up. A lot of times they are recycled from psychology, sociology, other places, but for us it's the kind of the mecca where we all would like to go. What is interesting is that this editor from AMR, she was saying, okay, there are 4 basic ways. So you can develop a new theory, so you see that it's the same process, no? And then it says you can also improve a process theory. What I like is that then she says, okay, what do I mean by developing a new theory? Is that you find a novel type of problem. And I think she mentions this example, but a lot of examples that I think you're also working on is we know that now in digital context, some things change. The way that people mediate or relate or interact, because there are these new elements in place of digital innovation. I think we will have hopefully opportunities to write a lot of new theories of how people do things because of this new environment. So here this is a novel type of problem. It's very thin the line between phenomenon-driven, like, oh, there is a new phenomenon, this is a new theory, because sometimes all theories still work. But hopefully we also have chances to craft those things in a different way. What I was mentioning before, and that's, I like that she clearly says, it says, okay, test the boundaries. So look at those elements that, okay, when does this theory stop working? Where does this not apply anymore? I found a case, a counter case. I want to defend that now this theory has a limitation. Maybe before nobody paid attention to this type of people or groups or companies and so on. And then we try to challenge and hopefully also develop a new theory for that specific group. Yeah, so here the idea that also synthesizing or putting ideas that are appearing in, and that's also the type of new theories that are putting together pieces. but there is now some nice work on social movements and social communities, and how those also generate new type of dynamics on innovation with companies. So there is probably new theories coming up on that area that I'm not so familiar. And at the end, the idea is that we change the way we think about the topics. So you see that we are, hitting on the very similar stories. Every time I've discussed with someone, okay, which paper would you recommend me if you have to suggest a paper to understand better what is a theoretical contribution, when I could not understand this? Everyone was telling me, okay, there is that paper from that guy, David Wetten, so 1989, and then that paper tells you how to do it. Okay, if you read the paper and you find how to do it, you tell me. I never found how to do it. I only found, okay, he says, what are the conditions? So he says it needs to be new. It needs to be well done. You need to answer the so what question. It needs to be well done. You see that, done well and well done, that is not the same. But you see that they are very similar to those other elements we had at the beginning. And at least from my experience, it's not enough to know this. So, you need to remember who cares about that, or why now is an important moment. I need more help. So I need to move this a step ahead. So that's what I would try. So to be able to move this conversation a step ahead, instead of just saying, you need to be new or novel, or you need to know, we try to understand more. So let's try to understand more what type of theoretical contributions are there, and then we look at the communication, how we explain it, how we can write those new things. So first attempt, or one that I like to try to classify and see different types of theoretical contributions. This comes from, I particularly follow this, the Corley and Gioia work, because we were trying actually also to do this. We were trying recently to map and put together all the different contributions in an area, in a research area. And we found that this was a very nice way to break them down. So, okay, has this contribution been practically useful? Has it been scientifically useful? You can see that they are integrating other type of frameworks and concepts about science and advance of science. And then they were trying to say, okay, has it been revelatory, so the idea of a radical innovation or this type of innovations, or has it just been an incremental innovation, a step forward? But he was surprised is that he was complaining, especially I think that's a critique that in engineering we don't see that often maybe, or at least I haven't heard, but in management they complain a lot, that we are not informing enough, we are not generating things that are useful for management thinking. So we are just doing things that are satisfying for us, but we are not addressing their problems or their issues. And then he was even complaining. This is 2011, but I think this is still the relevance and impact discussion. Now we are changing fields. So we are moving to marketing, and I guess that the guys in marketing, they need to be more specific. And actually this is the one I would suggest, the work from McKinney's, to try to say, okay, can you help me to understand what type of contribution are we working on this paper? And he says, okay, this is the super framework. Sorry, I haven't adapted anything. This is a copy-paste. I cannot do it better. So this is the types where it's kind of a direct quote of what they've been doing. What I like is that they are very good at trying to classify. I like this, specifically this metaphorical tool that they use. And then, so it explains, okay, in this paper, we are using a telescope approach. And what it means is that we are trying to look ahead. This is a novel framework. It's a new way of thinking. I don't know, maybe that doesn't apply to the case you had in mind, Fabio, but it's the idea that we are moving forward. We are seeing something that is not yet visible, and we are trying to clarify this element. A lot of times, what we are doing, and we try to develop theory, but because we are mapping the reality. There is a new phenomenon, many people have been working on that, and then I try to put order, and I develop a theory there. There are other, here we are broadening a bit, because here we have any type of conceptual contributions, so not really new theories only. I don't know if there is a specific one that gets the attention of. I don't know if it's the.
Not so kind to be a prosecutor.
Yes. Yeah, maybe that's because you are looking for evidence. I don't know. Maybe in the US, a prosecutor is a nicer job to do. I don't know. Yeah, but to be a prosecutor sounds a bit aggressive. So. Those were, and this is a nice paper again but this is the first way, for me it was surprising also to understand that there are so many different ways of making it explicit, a contribution, which shapes can it take. And you see in the top that there are different styles, so this idea of envisioning, explicating, relating, debating, this already starts to give kind of a flavor to the paper that I'm doing. And we need to be somewhat consistent when we then write on that. So just for a moment, because we've been pushing in one direction, at least for me, it's a lot of pressure. So what happens when we take the other perspective, the perspective of the reviewer, the one that looks at our paper? And then we go back to the work that we have from Jim, and then he says, okay, so what do I tell reviewers that they should be looking for? It's always useful, no? Because this way we can also kind of pay attention to what they will be looking for. I says, okay, there should be a clearly statement of what the theory, current theory predicts, and what the prior empirical shows, and what is actually not known, and how we contribute. When I look at this, I say, oh, that's the classic engineering approach. That I can understand. So I show you what is the state of the art. Those guys did this, they achieved these results. These other guys did that, they achieved these results, and I'm doing this and I achieve much better results. And that's kind of the classic, clear way of approaching. So what they are suggesting is be explicit. Put this in the paper, make it easy to follow. Don't camouflage, don't hide it, make it very visible. And that's a classic story, but that's so the idea that if it hasn't been studied, maybe there is a reason for that, and blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to put that on the story. But that's the first point. So I didn't know, for example, that a reviewer would be already paying attention of where is this theoretical contribution already in the introduction. That sometimes, for me at least, was a surprise. So it's okay, they expect already in the introduction, the way you explain it, make it visible, that the paper has as objective to have a clear theoretical contribution. And then, yes, probably in your theoretical model, hypotheses, propositions, you will again make this visible. But already bring it up, otherwise you might lose the person very early. Now if you need to take a breath, take it now. Because now we are going into what I find, I like it because it's incredibly explicit. So how do I write that? Okay, we've been talking about this, and I hope at least some of you are convinced that that's maybe a good way. But how do I actually make it happen in the text? Again, a paper from Gerardo Patriota. So what he was trying to argue is that, and this is a more general, this is a more general way of crafting the whole paper. So that's what this article is interesting because of that. So he explicitly, I don't know if I had highlighted this part. So he mentioned, for example, the elements of conceptual clarity that apply to this theoretical contribution. But those are general suggestions on what he wants. So it's okay, the research question needs to be answered, and stuff like this. So let's say general recommendations. What I found, and if you have another paper, please share it with me because I'm kind of obsessed with this. So the best paper I found on how to actually write things comes from Karen Locker and Karen Golden-Biddle. And it's getting old, so I think we will need a new version because maybe the style of writing, so many people have adopted that we are maybe need to do a refresher on that. This comes from a very biased, narrow sample. So they are just looking at ASQ and AMJ, the two of the top journals in management, and they look at, as you can see, quite old articles, 1976, 1996, 21 here, 61 on the other side, so totally 82 papers. Those two journals are known for the necessity to elaborate what you say. It doesn't mean that they are incredibly wrong, but articles, they are usually incredibly well written. Or at least somebody has spent a lot of time writing them. So what do they find out? So their objective was to understand how do people write and argue when they have an opportunity to contribute? How do they use text? What type of strategies do they use? And those of you that know the paper, you are free to also add and share or discuss on this. Let's skip this part. So the first thing that they found out is that people try to build a coherent mesh around the story that they are going to be building. How do they do that? So the first thing that they try to do, or one of the most common strategies, that they try to synthesize all what is happening around. They say that they do these approaches, that they formulate all the ideas that are around that research area, they try to show that there are relationships, and then they do this trick that is, for me, it's still a trick, this reinterpreting of the previous work. This little thing of how do I reuse the previous work on this area to shape my story? It's still the whole challenge of what is the difference between a systematic lit review where I don't add that much interpretation with this review that I'm framing my story, and I use this convention connection that I need. What she says is, and it's nice because she brings examples. No, she says, okay, you need to make connections between the divergent literatures. So family theorists and therapists and organizational theories and consultants share many concepts. Each field, blah, 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 has been influenced by this. Each is interested in blah, blah, blah. And then you can bring in the dualities or challenges. No? Many scientists see the world dualistically, as did blah, 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 while the other ones see it like this way. And then this example of how to reinterpret what has been written says, okay, then you can go into the idea that these type organizations can be understood by this. They make explicit what is implicit in the job burnout literature. So you are trying to explain to the reader what the others have done before and why it makes sense and why it comes in this way or that other way. This is a bit long, so I need to, at least I will stop at the ones that I have as highlights. Something that doesn't come sometimes that naturally is that we need to build this, almost following this, the Kuhn paradigms. No? We need to show that there is an accumulation of coherence of elements, and that then there is a moment that things stop, and that's where we come next. It says, oh, but do I need to make this explicit? It says, yeah, people do it explicitly. So they explain, for example, that many other people have been looking at these elements. So for example, many relationships are important to develop a long and rich history over the years, blah, 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 most recently, blah, blah, blah. So using the time even to show that there has been a progression there. There are classic elements, and also you can see this idea of constructing dense citations when you start to argue, okay, these guys looked at this, these guys looked at that, those guys looked at this, and then when we put it all together, we realize that we need to move the field upwards or to the side or another place. Another way that we have to problematize is that when we show that there is non-coherence, and we try to also put those previous words with words like continuing controversy, or the ones that we use a lot. No? On the one hand, we have those guys, on the other hand. But for me, what is interesting is that says, okay, what it comes sometimes naturally to you is actually the best strategy to also put it in the text and to use this. So use it as a natural way of doing this. For example, the idea of there are competing explanations of those, everything that is in italics is because those terms were being used by many people to show what is coming next. So how do we then generate those other the gaps, the spaces for our contribution before we even put it in there? The idea that we need to generate the sensation that there is incompleteness to the reader, that there is something missing in the table. It says, okay, there are examples here that with our objective then is that we want this, this, and that, but then it's a paradigm, this was missing, and then we want to add the next piece. We go then in the classic story of the gaps. No? Then we always say, so there needs to be a gap. So basically they are arguing, the two currents, is that you need to build this gap in your own text and the way you explain the story. So sometimes the idea of a gap, it's not something that you can touch and it's super clear and accepted by everyone, but the way that you have argued and built the previous pieces make it evident. And then the whole story is that then we need to position the paper using even those strategies or ways. This is my goal. And what I like is that I think that we still use it, this type of approaches, and that comes from Raphael, you know, that my goal was to place another stone on the path towards improved service by offering a close examination at the role of service employees and their interaction with customers. But it's making it explicit. So for me, again, this was a surprise. I thought, oh, the reader should imagine that that's my goal. It says, no, just write it. Our goal in this paper is to do this step and that other step. So all the other ideas of problematization and so on, I will not go in detail, but you can see, and I think that makes a lot of, or fits with some of the things you might have been looking or discussing. Type of sentences that they are using. So the idea is that we bring this contrast, we bring those problems that are there. So when we say, okay, we even can make one research view hit with the other one, and then let's have a fight. And then it's a way of explaining a story. It's not the only way to generate those paradoxes, but it's a very common way of framing and explaining the contribution. The idea that you can say something like, the rapid strategic decision does not deal with the two key realities. This text advocates an alternative thesis, blah, 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 blah. So, I hope I managed to, this was the hardest part, but the paper is nice to read and spend more time because of looking at those specific type of sentences that can help to establish those things. I assume that a lot of them are maybe familiar, but at least for me they are still, oh yeah, I should use this type of argumentation. What surprised me is that all these stories, not only applying to, let's say, strategic management or these top journals, actually it's a problem that interests, for example, that's from Violina Redova, that she was also trying to discuss that in the Journal of Supply Chain Management, so a different subfield inside management, saying that she thinks that there was an issue, that authors are not able to problematize and give solutions and make it clear what are they bringing on the table. Or that something that she was suggesting, but for me at least this is still too at abstraction level. You need to decompose the insight into concepts and the relationships among them and integrate these into a whole. So how do you build this whole picture? And you see again the idea of originality and usefulness, but connected to what's already there. So it seems that everyone is using the same stories to explain this. That's another, this is Business and Society, so a different type of journal, but basically also discussing what contributes a good theory. Moving to information systems, that's also a very nice fact. I think it's also from, if I'm not wrong, one of the editors also discussing that they need to emphasize their contribution. So don't try to build castles around them, but just make it clear, make it visible, explaining what you have in here. And again, he's not that favorable, as you can see, on these far-fetched or far-reaching implications from your research. So, getting to the end, because otherwise we will run out of time. It seems that we might even have a theory about how we should build theories. That becomes a bit complex, but interesting also contributions or works. This again comes from a very a strategic management approach. They were trying in this case to say, okay, what type of questions, what types of can I use to start thinking about the next theoretical contribution that I want to do? And then they have examples, they apply mostly to strategic management, but the type of questions are very similar. So, and you can see that this is a kind of example of a process. So can I look at the antecedents? Can I look at what happens before? Can I look at actually what happens after? Can I look at the elements inside the process? Can I use the whys, the hows? Can I change some of the constructs or variables? And these had additional detail. And we had from the hyper-productive Dean Shepard and Roy Sotheby, they recently also had a nice paper that they tried to do again the same. So they were trying to say, this thing of theory building is becoming too much of an art instead of a science, but actually maybe we should write down how do you do those things actually in practice and how most of the people do it. And what you will see is that they, at least for me, they have a very kind of interesting things that the type of projects that you have and that we also have in Denmark, they kind of give us kind of hope that we can still do theoretical contributions and they will let us publish maybe one day, is that we can use a lot of metaphors, so we can use ideas from other fields, we can do these connections where interdisciplinarity has an advantage, we can do a lot of things related to practice, when we can follow actors in their real life, and this brings new ideas, and that's where ideas sometimes come from, and we have the whole concept that engaged scholarship is another source of generation of those ideas. So it's not only that we are, and that's not a bad thing, but that we are super embedded in highly conceptual papers, or that then you find this theory gap and so on, but or it's not only about testing also existing theories and finding that data that doesn't fit, but also a lot of the things can come from other activities that we are doing or working on. I promise to have something useful, hopefully, of the session, and that's one of the most useful things I found. It's a comment also from, again, from a management journal, but it's because I always need it, or I'm always looking for specific tools I can use to do this a bit better. And in this editorial article, they say, okay, there are 5 or 6 things that we suggest that you should be doing. I have them in a bit bigger. So they say, if it makes sense to you, when you start, you are in a project, you find something interesting, you find something that surprises you. Can you try to write one paragraph? Can you try to write this as an abstract? Can you then try to do that as a graphical representation, as a diagram, especially for those of you that are visual thinkers, it helps a lot. So can you simplify even? And I was so happy to see this in the paper, because I've always been criticized to apply my consulting approach that everything are 2 by 2 matrices. So you can use, it's okay to use a 2 by 2 matrix to simplify reality and think about the problem. Then try to explain that idea verbally, and then from here, sometimes it's okay, so we can start with the problem, the thing that surprised you, then go back and look at those references, at those key theories that are related to that. Can you then, this is again thinking about a conceptual paper, or at least as the first step. Can you then develop propositions? Can you develop things that are connecting the reality with the theory? And then can you try to then write the bare bones, or the outline, a little bit of a developed outline that develops this thinking idea that you have, this basic idea, and puts it into practice. And then the whole story is that this is probably not a one-way process, but it's an iterative process. This is where I wanted to reach, and I see that we are, it's actually, I'm hitting on the last minute of the session. So the whole story was, yes, everyone talks about theoretical contributions. We need to be novel, we need to be conventional, but it's quite hard to make them happen and to develop those. We have options to do them, we have strategies to write about this, and then we can make it also develop and put it in practice. So at the end, what I hope that you also take away is this is just one example, but you might find many other different ways. For example, going back to one of the papers and says, okay, I can use this type of logic, or this type of logic really applies to me, or this is the way I would be using this. That's it from my side, but you're free to start sharing questions or comments or anything. Thank you.